This video and podcast is brought to you by the Kulkarni Law Firm. Reach out to the Kulkarni Law Firm for advice on third-party issues, state board issues, contracting, pharmacy purchase and sales issues, and more, especially in the context of fraud and compliance. Reach out now at darshan@kulkarnilawfirm.com or call me at 302-252-6959. You can also just visit our website at kulkarnilawfirm.com. That's Kulkarni lawfirm.com. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of DarshanTalks. I'm really excited for today's conversation because I'm going to have the conversation I've been wanting to have forever, and I didn't know I could actually ever have it again, which is everyone in pharmacy, in compounding, knows of the NECC tragedy. I believe it was 600-something people were injured, 70-something people died because of compounding oversight. And because, well, to be clear, lack of compounding and compliance oversight. Our guest today is worked in a related sister company, so did not have any actual oversight over that matter. But she was in a sister company and saw some of the goings on. Even more interestingly, she actually has a background in quality and regulation. So I'm really excited to have this conversation because we're going to talk in generalities. We're not going to be getting into the details, but we want to get a sense of what was going on at NECC and maybe build from there. But before I go on, our guest today is Melissa Stefko. Melissa, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm Melissa Stefko. I work for the Flex Pro Group in the consulting space for pharmacy and pharmaceuticals. And in quality and regulatory, and I'm really excited to be here and talk about compounding pharmacy and some of the quality and regulations that are going on.
So let's start from the beginning, Melissa. Why are you interested in compounding?
I think I just kind of fell into it. I came from a CMO into pharma and then fell into compounding and really thought it was interesting. It's a lot more of a manual process. There's a lot of different regulations around it. And it just was really interesting to see how things move so quickly, change very quickly. The regulatory landscape you have to take it day by day. I mean, there's FDA, there's state boards of pharmacy. There's a lot of different things coming at you. So I just found it really challenging and fun and loved staying with it for a long time.
So let's sort of start talking about some of those beginnings. You were involved with another company, Ameridos. And again, just to be clear, she does not represent Ameridos. She's talking just about her experience, which is not necessarily representative of anything. So I'm putting all the disclaimers we can possibly put out there. And feel free to add disclaimers if you can think of anything, Melissa, because I think we're kind of putting it out there. But talk to me a little bit about how you got involved in Ameridos.
I was recruited from a pharmaceutical company, and so I was coming from GMP into Ameridos. I thought it was really interesting what they were doing. I was excited to kind of learn something new, and so I went into that. And honestly, overall, it was a really excellent company for the time. I think that they had a lot of cutting edge things for what the regulations were calling for at that time. But there were some things that they fell short on, which FDA pointed out during their inspection, and unfortunately they were linked and got a lot of the brunt of what NECC did.
So let's talk a little bit about that. We're talking about Ameridos. You actually started from a GMP manufacturing background for products. And you made the point that what they did was excellent for that time. So let's start with that beginning, which is, as someone who's worked in manufacturing and then worked in pharmacy, how big is that gap?
Back in 2012, 2011?
Back in 2012.
It was pretty big. There were some things that I just didn't, it took a lot of getting used to. There were some things that just didn't feel right. I was very early in my career, so it was hard to identify a lot of those things. But there were things that I felt could be done better, and it was very much the culture of well, we are following USP 797. That's what the FDA wants us, or what Board of Pharmacy wants us to do. FDA doesn't really have jurisdiction, so it's just a different ball game. So that was kind of the accepted thought process, and ultimately, with the way that it kind of was going, and not that anything was wrong, it just, for me, coming from a GMP background, it just wasn't for me. So my time there was pretty limited. It was only, I think, a year that I was there, and left far before the NECC tragedy. But yeah, overall, I think they felt that they were compliant with standards, and that's what the Board of Pharmacy felt like they were compliant as well, because they had great inspections.
So they had good inspections. What are the big differences at that time? We don't want to talk about today because we don't. That's just not the scope of today's conversation, and
Sure.
because we want to all escape legal liability right now. But at that time, do you believe the state boards were doing all they could, or were they just misinformed, didn't have enough knowledge? Like, what was going on at that point as someone who was receiving audits and stuff from the state board?
Yeah, I think that they're overall, my general opinion is a lot of pharmacists are really great at clinical. They're really great at, talking with patients and that sort of thing. I don't think that they were well educated in manufacturing in general. I don't think that they fully understood it. I think they're looking, at a guidance, and then they're trying to apply it to the best of their ability. And they didn't have the right amount of tools to do so. So what was their understanding of microbiology? What was their understanding about stability or extractables and leachables? I don't think that they had access to those types of tools and conversations to be able to fully properly do an inspection. I think that they did the best that they could at the time.
And I mean, I'll sort of give my perspective. I've worked in similar facilities, shall we say. And we did, like, I worked in hospital pharmacy, and we did a fair amount of compounding, like a significant amount, because you're doing this for patients all the time. And I can only imagine, we had sterile clean rooms and all that good stuff. The pharmacies would spend literally millions of dollars getting your systems, quote unquote, up to par. But I also had done GMP inspections. And I remember going, the distinction between getting it up to par and what manufacturers do is day and night.
Yes.
And I guess that's what I was trying to understand. Like, you've actually had a similar sort of comparison background to be able to talk about it. So now you're in a situation where you saw the distinction, you saw what they were doing at that time. At this point, it's 10 years ago, so I expect everything's changed to the extent they're even around. But what was your general perspective? And I say this as a pharmacist, we were never taught the standards associated with compounding. I remember actually taking a course from Mediska on how to compound, and there were never that level of sort of education associated with it. It was pharmacists teaching pharmacists, and they had a what I would describe as a rudimentary understanding of what expectations were from an FDA perspective. And it was always, you don't have to live up to FDA standards, you have to live up to USP 797 or something like that. And now we're talking about USP 800 for those people who are kind of keeping track. The big question was, why is there a gap? Why should we, sort of connecting it to today and looking back, do you think from a regulatory standpoint, it makes sense that there's a distinction or a difference between outsourcing facilities and 503A facilities versus manufacturing facilities?
Yeah, I do. I think based on the design of what they're supposed to be, 503A is supposed to be a small pharmacy. They're supposed to do things patient specific, not really have a whole lot of stock on hand and that sort of thing. They're really tailored to doing that personalized medicine, whereas the 503B is meant for larger batches, larger scale, and for office use and that sort of thing. So I do think it's appropriate the way that the regulations are starting to be written and followed, and the standards that are coming into play. Um, but by no means is it a large scale manufacturing site like a pharma would be. So I do think that those exemptions are appropriate for the 503B to be able to meet the need of the market, whereas pharma can't. I mean, they're incentivized to make things that will give a return on investment and not necessarily always fulfill what the patient need is in the population. So I do think that they are appropriately separated regulatory standard wise.
So let's talk about now going back to 2012, and you were living through Ameridos, and you were looking at what they were doing at that time, some of the considerations at that time. What was the opportunity to get into a sister facility? What happened? What made you go, well, let's go look at that facility? Because you were close.
Yeah, so it was a town over, and what Ameridos was doing, it was the old Ameridos building, which is where NECC was operating. So as Ameridos continued to grow, they decided to open up a portion of the old facility to expand operations. So my job was to go over there and kind of take a look at investigations and see what was going on in the operations and that sort of thing. So being there, inherently, you see the sister site and their operations as well. So that's how I kind of got into the building and was able to look around and see what was going on.
So you got in, you were appropriately there. So this was not sort of a surreptitious, I'm going to snoop around kind of situation. You just happened to be there. And what... And let's assume for this purpose that Ameridos was doing everything right. I'm sure they had their audits and all that good stuff, but let's say they're doing everything right. What was your experience looking at what they were doing at NECC?
As far as the manufacturing side goes, and looking into their clean room, was quite small and quite packed. It was not with just equipment, but with people. And there was pretty limited sort of gowning and things that I wasn't used to coming from a GMP manufacturing site. And the building itself was interesting because they also housed, I believe that they owned the building. So they also housed their recycling plant within that area. So when you get out of the car, you could smell it. And then when you had to enter, well, depending on where you parked, it was a very small parking lot. So sometimes you would have to park around in the back and you just see the recycling rubbish. I mean, I think one time I saw a mattress out there. It's just, it just isn't an appropriate space. And if the facility is, designed appropriately, that stuff shouldn't really matter, but I don't think that it was. And I think that's what they saw eventually down the line.
So for someone who hasn't followed the NECC tragedy, or they're just sort of they're more in the GMP world, talk to us a little bit about what happened with NECC.
There's a lot of things that happened, a lot of things that went wrong. They didn't have any quality oversight. And I believe that the person that did have the quality oversight was either, or could be a combination of both, inexperienced, but not kind of given the power to make those regulatory and quality decisions that would be appropriate for a quality unit. But what ultimately happened was they grew too fast and too big too fast, and were cutting corners. They weren't doing the cleans appropriately of their clean room. They were trying to save energy and shutting down the HVACs at night without doing any sort of scale back up to the clean room. So there were a lot of things that were not done appropriately. They didn't really have the expertise to kind of dive in and do it right or fix the system. It was just a culture of go, 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 and we're just going to do this. So I think unfortunately, a lot of the pharmacists that got wrapped up in that didn't really have an idea of what was going on. I think that they were just doing what they thought was their job of, taking a look at the label of a product, putting it in a package and shipping it. And that was the scope of their work. But ultimately, pharmacists have the responsibility of the drug product itself and, further upstream. So I think that there was just a lot of things going on that they just weren't set up the way that they should have been to operate in that fashion. And they were operating beyond, patient specific, the ultimate goal of compounding pharmacy, the patient specific way of doing things. They were operating as a manufacturer and getting those prescriptions later down the road.
So, and again, for those people who didn't follow it on, did you hear when the FDA walked into their facility? Did you hear about what sort of, as someone who was close but not within the facility, what was that experience like, hearing about your sister company? What was going on? What was the buzz as it happened?
I had left Emeritus a couple years before this happened. But I was still in Massachusetts and heard about this. And it was all over the news. It was local for us, so quite a big story. And the buzz was just, a lot of the Emeritus employees were very defensive of things that are coming, kind of trickling over to Emeritus, and some of the bad publicity that they were receiving, which rightfully so in some extent. However, the NECC part, I don't think any of us were surprised. It was bound to happen. It was kind of like the Wild West thinking of just whatever, anything goes. And I don't think a lot of us were very surprised by that. But we were from being in a sister company, we were very shielded from that piece of it, beyond me being able to go to the other facility to collect information just for my site. So it was really interesting to see how things unfolded and how everything kind of went down, I guess.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, you are a proponent of outsourcing facilities and compounding and the like. So my question is, between NECC, which you nearly lived through, and where we are today, you've seen the FDA exert jurisdiction. You've seen Congress give FDA jurisdiction. You've seen state boards sort of pick up from there. What has been your biggest changes that you're seeing that makes you think compounding is safe, there's a role for it, and here are the big roles it fills?
I think the FDA stepping in really, it changed the industry as a whole. I think that the bad actors had to be weeded out. That there was no doubt about it. I think a lot of the boards of pharmacy realized, we are pharmacists at the end of the day. We don't have the knowledge that we need to be able to fully inspect these types of facilities. So we're going to need to get training on that, or until we do that, we're going to defer to FDA on all of our inspections, and whatever they say happens at a compounding pharmacy, we're going to just go with that as a blanket statement, because we don't really know. We're not the experts in this manufacturing space that it's kind of evolved into. So it's night and day, and I think it's excellent, the amount of work that boards of pharmacy, FDA, and the industry itself, and USP coming out with different regulations and or guidances and things. I think that they've done an excellent job trying to scale it up to become a safe industry. And today, I've been to multiple compounding facilities. I think there will always be the small amount that are the bad actors, and they fly under the radar somehow, some way. But overall, at least the larger ones, I think they're very safe. I think that they do a lot of things the right way and the way they should be done, and they're in operation because of that. And those are the larger facilities that are targeted by these regulatory agencies that are more frequently inspected because they're higher risk. So I think that they have done it really well at kind of closing that gap in the compliance space.
And what do you think has been the biggest changes you've seen in this evolution?
I think just bringing in GMP, those standards just did not exist in compounding pharmacy, and to get pharmacists to think this other way is a huge challenge, because this has always kind of been their baby. Like, I'm the pharmacist, I'm the one, compounding or formulating and that sort of thing. And for them to understand how this other piece kind of comes over and is involved in the process was really foreign to them. So it's a huge transition for the industry as a whole. But I think that bringing in all the testing that's required, whereas pharmacists are typically used to anecdotal sort of work of like, well, this doesn't fall out of solution because I've been compounding it for 10 years. Now you have to actually prove it. So, or sterility of this container closure system, it's always been fine. I've never had any complaints. It's fine. Well, now you have to prove it. So I think that concept was lost on some, and they've exited the industry. And I think, that works for them, and that's great for the compounding industry because the ones that stayed actually get it and understand that this has to continue to evolve and be better.
So we've now reached a stage where the FDA obviously exerts its jurisdictions, especially in the context of outsourcing facilities, but you're getting the state boards of pharmacy who are now better educated and are not hesitant to exert their impact. What has been your experience in terms of watching the state boards exert their influence?
Well, I'm located in Florida, so I think we have, by far, of all the state boards, we have the best one, the most educated. Honestly, it's true. We have the most educated board when it comes to compounding pharmacy. They have their they're pharmacists, but they're excellent knowledge, and they've really kind of soaked up what the FDA has taught them and attended the classes, taking this really seriously, so that they know about microbiology, they know about clean room design, they know what it's supposed to do. So they've done a really great job at keeping Florida safe in that aspect. And when they do inspections across state lines, some boards have still kind of leaned towards, we're just going to take with whatever FDA says. We don't really know. Some other boards have outsourced to consulting agencies in order for pharmacies to be able to get licensure in their state, because they know they don't know. So I think that's great too, in a sense that they understand that they need to bring in experts in order to make sure that things are okay. And then there are some boards that have just gone way too far and said, we don't care what FDA says. We're making our own standards, and you have to follow these if you want to send medication into our state. So, there's this wide range of opinions, I guess I would say, between each state, and it's been interesting to see how it evolves over time.
And do you let's talk about the ones that basically say we're going to basically adhere to what the FDA says. Well, that's kind of consistent, so that there's not much discussion there. But to the extent that there are some that go, we hear what the FDA is saying, but here are our standards. Have you seen much chagrin? That's a good word to use, chagrin, by outsourcing facilities or 503As in the context of there are two different standards to live by, and what are the impacts of that on the compounding industry?
It makes things very, very, very difficult. So basically, the ultimate goal as a regulatory person or a quality person in compounding pharmacy is you just have to take the worst case of all of the standards, and that's what you have to apply. And if you can't make that work, for example, FDA loves seeing a sink outside of a clean room for obvious reasons, but 797 standards and a lot of state boards want it in the first ISO 8 room. So it makes things very difficult to kind of balance. So you have to just have that scientific justification of why you're choosing what you're doing, and take it if the board doesn't accept it, and that's just it's a game, it's a dance, and it's very frustrating at times.
So when you get called in to talk to people about these issues, what you see is an evolving standard of issues that are being brought up. For example, I think yesterday or the day before is news, was that the FDA updated its list of medications that can be compounded. They also, the area of bioidentical hormones and hormone replacement therapy keeps coming up. Talk to me a little bit about your experience. And this is a bit of a preview because we're probably going to dig into this question a little bit deeper in another conversation. But talk to me a little bit more about your thought process around the role of pharmacies to compound / manufacture, depending on if it's a 503A or a 503B, these types of products.
So ultimately, I'm not a physician, and there aren't many physicians at FDA or Board of Pharmacy, for example. I think that some of the way the regulations are going is taking away that autonomy from physicians of their prescribing therapies. So I think that compounding pharmacies are here to meet that patient-specific need, that personalized medicine. The commercial drugs are not one size fits all. A lot of people have allergies to some of the vehicles in the commercial version of products. A lot of people don't need that type of concentration. They need it broken down or into a different route of administration, different form. And that's the role of compounding pharmacies, is to meet that need. I think that, there's a lot working in the hospital. I'm sure you're aware, there's a lot of medication errors that happen on the floor when you aren't getting compounded medication from an outsourcing facility. A lot of physicians don't know there's a 10% overfill in every commercial vial, and put the whole thing into an IV bag. So they're kind of, in a way, dosing a patient incorrectly because they think they're giving a certain dose, which is the label claim, but it's plus minus 10%. So they don't understand that when you get an outsourced medication, it's exact. Like, that label claim is what it is. So I think that there is a need in the market for things like that. But there are things that that FDA wants it to be that don't make sense. FDA would love for compounding to just be drug shortage filling and outsourcing to hospitals and that sort of thing. And the way that they've set up to meet drug shortage, there's no way any compounding pharmacy could do that. They've out-regulated anybody from doing that. So it wouldn't make sense. And unfortunately, they're unable to meet that sort of need. So there's a lot of work to be done still.
So we'll talk about that hopefully and more in the next time we have you over, Melissa. But thank you so much for coming on. Any parting words?
Get out there and vote. It's important to make sure, and please visit compounding.com to see about some of the regulatory issues that are going on in the industry, to get more educated on some things that may be coming up in the future that could impact you or your family or people that you know.
Thank you. These conversations are not intended to be legal, regulatory, or clinical advice and may not be right for you. These conversations are intended for educational purposes only. Conversations on this forum do not create an